Did you know that even in the Middle Ages and ancient times, there were more ways to get around than by walking? Of course, at that time, nobody had such things as a car, plane, or train, but there were still roads, rivers, and forests. The main thing to keep in mind when planning any trip in the Middle Ages was your destination. Depending on where you wanted to go, you had to choose whether to go by foot, horse, cart, boat, or sled. Travel was difficult no matter what method you used. Let's find out how people traveled in the Middle Ages. Were there buses then? And if not, what did our ancestors use instead? The first thing that comes to mind is a road trip. It sounds pretty cool until you remember that there were no paved roads, regular maintenance, or street signs. Not only that, but also vehicles like carts and wagons had difficulty passing through, let alone driving at speed. Moreover, bridges were a rarity, so you could easily end up having to cross a flooded area. Also, if you decide to make a long journey without preparation, you risk becoming prey to robbers because police patrols were rare. To protect yourself on the road, it was necessary to assemble a team of armed guards. But even that didn't always save people from attacks. Bandits operated both individually and in organized groups, attacking travelers along the roads, in forests, and near large cities. During the Renaissance, the Robbers Guild even reached 60,000 people. So the best way to avoid this danger was to travel in large and well-protected convoys. Roads in the Middle Ages differed significantly from the roads of the 21st century. Usually they were wide enough for 2 wagons to drive side by side. Sometimes they became impassable during heavy rains or snowfalls, turning into swamps. This happened especially often in low-lying areas and near rivers. For example, even a small rainfall could turn a road next to the Seine River into a real lake. Even if the weather was fine, the road could be extremely bumpy, dusty, and uncomfortable. That's why people tried to avoid traveling in summer unless absolutely necessary. In addition to natural obstacles, there were many artificial ones. Along the road, you could suddenly find a closed gate blocking the path. Those belonged to landowners who fenced off their land. Passing through such a gate required permission or payment of a fee. Even worse was the situation with ferries. The crossing was paid separately, and it was very expensive. In some places, drivers had to pay tolls. The cost of crossing a river or a swampy area was calculated based on the length, width, and depth of the water, as well as the weight of the wagon and its load. Plus, there was always the risk that the ferry would sink. If you didn't have enough money for all the tolls and crossings, you could try taking a detour. But this option was suitable only for pedestrians. Carts usually couldn't pass through narrow forest paths. Therefore, for trips through forests, it was better to dismount and lead the horse. There was one more thing to fear while traveling: wild animals. Wild boars, wolves, bears, and other predators felt completely comfortable in the forests of the Middle Ages. Wolves often attacked travelers, but it was much more likely for a person to encounter a wild boar. They were aggressive, quick, and strong animals that could easily pierce a person with their tusks. Dangerous animals were not only in the forests, but also along the roads. After all, where there were people, there were also dogs. In the Middle Ages, they were large, vicious, and not always friendly toward strangers. People tried to protect themselves from all the dangers of the road by creating special structures. Thus, in the forests, travelers used to build shelters where they could hide from rain, wind, cold, and wild animals. Unfortunately, this didn't always help, since sometimes travelers were robbed right in such shelters. To reduce the number of such cases, people began to build castles along the roads. Later, some of them evolved into fortresses. In general, the higher and stronger the castle walls, the more likely it was that travelers would stop there. However, sometimes you don't need a roof over your head, but just a place to spend the night. In the Middle Ages, this problem was solved by inns. They were mostly located in castles and monasteries. Travelers could spend the night there and get something to eat, but they had to pay extra for all of this. Ordinary peasants could afford to visit an inn only occasionally, while nobles and kings rarely spared money on lodging. It's worth noting that inns were not exactly a place to relax. There was noise, crowds, flies, and fleas. You could easily catch some infection there, especially since rooms were shared with livestock in many inns. Nevertheless, it was still better than sleeping outdoors. There was one more advantage of inns. Most of them were located close to post houses where you could change horses if you were exhausted. These establishments were created specifically to make it easier for mail couriers to travel long distances. There were several dozen post houses on major routes, and they operated under the auspices of the king or prince. It was important to arrive at the post house before dark, since couriers didn't travel at night. Also, the service worked only within the borders of one state. When traveling abroad, you had to pay extra for the delivery of the letter. If you didn't have enough money to pay for the horse ride, you could walk along with it. However, that was more tiring than riding a donkey. The latter was considered a vehicle for the poor. Donkeys were slower than horses, but stronger than humans, so they were able to carry heavier loads. The price of donkey travel depended on the distance. In France, it was about 2 sous for every 10 kilometers. For comparison, the average salary of a worker in the Middle Ages was about 15 sous per week. A rich man could afford to travel in more comfort. He could hire a whole team of oxen, horses, or mules to pull his carriage. The richer the passenger, the more luxurious the transport. Nobles rode in carriages with canopies, while ordinary people had to be content with a wagon. True luxury was a golden howden on wheels. Only popes and emperors could afford such a means of transportation. Interestingly, even in those days, there were accidents involving such vehicles. Once a golden howdah carrying Pope Leo X overturned. As a result, the pontiff broke his leg. Traveling by boat was another thing altogether. Water transport was indispensable for long trips. It was used to deliver various goods, including bread, wood, and stone. Traveling by boat was faster than traveling by land, but more dangerous. Rivers were infested with pirates, so sailing without protection was almost like a death sentence. It's a good thing there were seafarers who defended coastal cities from raids. These warriors sailed on flat-bottomed boats that were easy to maneuver and quickly accelerate. They pursued pirates and sometimes even rammed their ships. Naval battles were fierce, but no less spectacular. Fighters stood on the bows of their boats and threw spears at the enemy. When the chase was over and the pirates were captured, the sailors took them off the boat and sent them to shore. Some people used unusual methods of transportation. Shepherds and goat herders drove their animals over long distances. Kings and popes sometimes moved in a completely original way. They were carried in baskets or cages. Sounds crazy, but it's true. Once Pope Innocent VIII was lifted into a basket with the help of ropes. The clergy pulled him out of the dungeon window. After that, he was put in a cage on wheels and taken away. It's important to note that traveling in the Middle Ages was not only dangerous, it was also incredibly exciting. Imagine seeing new lands, meeting different people, hearing interesting stories. This was a great opportunity to learn something new. And even though travelers risked their lives, few of them regretted it. While you ponder the adventures of medieval travelers, consider sharing your own travel experiences in the comments below. Did you enjoy our journey through time? If so, please show your support. We've got many more captivating episodes of amazing history waiting for you.